Alright guys, well, I told you I would read you one more chapter of Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH, and we're going to watch our movie tonight at 7 o'clock. 7. Here we go. Right, in the last chapter they learned to read. They explained these letters. I liked how they explained A. They called it, remember, a triangle with legs. And when he said it, he said A. And when he said this, he said R, right? R. That's the letter, R. I can't remember how she explained it. And I think a cross and a snake, remember? And they had to figure out that this was what they are, they're rat. But when they put the S, it made more than one. And they learned putting an S on the end of words makes it more than one word, right? More than one of whatever it is. So they are learning to read. Alright, so remember Justin got out and he saw the air ducts. So now he's going to escape again. Nicodemus wants to go with him, but they said no, just in case he gets caught. They don't want them to think that the rats are getting smart yet, right? They know they're getting smart. They don't want their captains to go, their captors to know it. So here we go. We're on page 129. And so it was, by teaching us how to read, they had taught us how to get away. Justin climbed easily up to the open door of his cage and vanished over the top with a flick of his tail. He came back an hour later, greatly excited and full of information. Yet it was typical of Justin that even excited as he was, he stayed calm. He thought clearly. He climbed down the front of my cage, rather than his own, and spoke softly. We both assumed that by now the other rats were asleep. Nicodemus, come on out. I'll show you how. He directed me as I reached through the wire bars of the door, and I felt beneath it. I found the small metal knob, slid it forward and sideward. Right, we would say sideways today. Now, I even said sideways. And sideward. And felt the door swing loose against my shoulder. I followed him up the side of the cage to the shelf above. Then we stopped. It was the first time I had met Justin face to face. He said, "It's better talking here than around the partition." Yes. Did you get down? Yes. How did you get back up? At the end of the shelf, there's a big cabinet. They keep the mouse cages on it. It has wire mesh doors. You can climb up and down like a ladder. Of course, I said. I remember now. I had seen that cabinet many times when my cage was carried past it. For some reason, perhaps because they were smaller, the mice were kept in cages within a cage. Justin said, "Nicodemus, I think I found the way to get out." You have? How? At each end of the room, there's an opening in the baseboard at the bottom of the wall. Right? Do you guys know what the baseboard is at the bottom of the wall? Let me show you mine. It's down over there. Let's see, can I get to it? Oops, my camera fell. It's right there. That's the base. Oops. Sorry, when I point at my actual baseboard, it's not pointing at the baseboard. This is my closet, baseboard around the closet. There's my baseboard. There's the candlestick that fell off of the ledge up there, but this is the baseboard. It's against the wall. Right? There's my wall. Oops. See my light. There's the dome. Right? I like to do the same thing they do. To show someone what a meaning of a word is, I show them a picture of what it actually was. Right? Every time they saw the word rat, they showed them a picture of a rat. So it's a good way. Anyway, here we go. I lost my place. Let me pause my... Alright, right? We were at baseboard, because that's what we were looking at the bottom of the wall. Air blows in through one of them, and out the other. Each one has a metal grid covering it. See, there's a grid. I don't have one of those in my house. And on the grid, there's a sign that says, "Lift to adjust airflow." We have one in the classroom, like the thing on the wall that lets the air in and out. That's what they're talking about, right? But theirs is at the baseboard, at the bottom of the ground, on the floor. Some of you guys might have that. I don't. I lifted one of them. It hangs on hinges. Hinges are what are on the door. Oh, I do have that. There are the door hinges. There's one. It is right. I'll show you guys what I'm doing. Some higher hinge. Open the door higher. There we go. It is right. I have to point on the screen, not on my actual wall. There. That thing on the wall there. Oops. It's like a mirror, pointing in a mirror. Right there. See it? I'm pointing at it. That is the hinge. Alright, so they have hinges. But I like the way they explained it. They said it hangs on hinges like a trap door. I think you guys know what a trap door is. Right? It's a door, usually probably in the ground. If someone stands on it, it's trapped and people fall through it. Or for animals, we have trap doors for animals too. Behind it, there's a thing like a metal window. When you slide it wide open, more air blows in. But the main thing is, it's easily big enough to walk through and get out. But what's on the other side? Where does it lead? On the other side, there's a duct. A thing like a square metal pipe built right into the wall. I walked along it, not very far, but I can figure out where it must go, right? We let our air in and out of our houses in these ducts. My house is really old. I don't even have one. There's bound to be a duct like it leading to every room in the building, and they must all branch off one main central pipe, and that one has to lead somewhere to the outside. Because that's where our air comes from. That's why they never open the windows. I don't think those windows can open. He was right, of course. The building had central air conditioning, right? Like our schools have, our new school has central air conditioning. Wait till you see it. What we had to do was find the main air shaft and explore it. There would have to be an intake at one end and an outlet at the other. But that was easier said than done, right? When I do stuff, somewhere it has to go in and somewhere it has to go out, right? Somewhere the air comes in to blow from, and then it blows out onto people in the room. And before it was done, there were questions to be answered. What about the rest of the rats? There were 20 of us in the laboratory, and we had to let the others know, right? There's 20 in their group A. So one by one, we woke them and showed them how to open their cages. It was an odd assembly that gathered that night. Like this odd means strange. They're a little weird, different. Under the dimmed lights, right? When the lights are dimmed, they're turned down. They're not off. They're just turned very low. Dim lights in the echoing laboratory. On the shelf where Justin and I had talked. We all knew each other in a way from the passing of messages over the preceding months. Yet, except for Jenner and me, none of us had ever really met, right? Him and Jenner knew each other before they ever went in there. We were strangers, though, as you can imagine, it did not take long for us to develop a feeling of comradeship, right? They're comrades, they're working together. For we 20 were alone in a strange world. Just how alone and how strange, none of us really understood at first. Yet, in a way, we sensed it from the beginning, even before they got smarter from their injections, right? The group looked at me as leader, probably because it was Justin and I who first set them free, and because Justin was obviously younger than I, right? They look at Nicodemus because Justin's the younger of the two, so somehow we usually look to the older person, like, oh, know more than us. I'm so old. We did not attempt to leave that night, but went together and looked at the metal grid Justin had discovered and made plans for exploring the air ducts. Jenner was astute at that sort of thing. He could foresee problems, right? If they tried to leave that night, they could get caught, so they're staking the joint, they're figuring it out. They're making a plan. You should always make a plan before you do something. With a vent like this leading to every room, he said, it will be easy to get lost. When we explore, we're going to need some way of finding our way back here. "Why should we come back?" someone asked. "Because it might take more than one night to find the way out. If it does, whoever is doing the exploring must be back in the cage by morning. Otherwise, Dr. Schultz will find out." Jenner was right. It took us about a week. What we did, after some more discussion, was to find some equipment. First, a large spool of thread in one of the cabinets, where some of us had seen Julie place it one day. Right, a spool of thread is what I sew with. It's that round, it's a cylinder shape. Second, a screwdriver that was kept on a shelf near the electrical equipment. Because, as Jenner pointed out, there would probably be a screen over the end of the air shaft to keep out debris, and we might have to pry it loose. What we really needed was a light, for the ducts at night were completely dark. But there was none to be had, not even a box of matches. The thread and the screwdriver we hid in the duct, a few feet from the entrance. We could only hope they would not be missed, or that if they were, we wouldn't be suspected, right? No one would think the rats were stealing the stuff if they did notice anything was missing, right? Would it be missed? Justin and two others were chosen as the exploration party. We're going to read Dora and her explorers tonight. We're going to watch Dora. One of the others was Arthur, whom you've met. Arthur was the engineer, I think, right? They had a terrible time at first. Here was a maze to end all mazes, right? This is a maze up in the air ducts. And in the dark, they quickly lost their sense of direction. Still, they kept at it, night after night, exploring the network of shafts that laced through like a cubical spider web. I don't know if you don't remember what a cube is. It's a square thing, like a Rubik's Cube. It's a shape, right? A cubical spider web. I know you guys know what a spider web, but these air ducts in the ceiling are like a spider web, cubicle. They're square though. Through the walls and ceilings of the building. They would tie the end of their thread to the grid in our laboratory and unroll it from the spool as they went. Right? They would leave a little trail of string behind them so they could find their way back. Just like in that other story. I can't think of the name of it. Time and time again, they reached the end of the thread and had enough to come back. And had to come back. Right? They had to come back when they got to the end of the thread. They didn't want to get lost. "It just isn't long enough," Justin would complain. "Every time I come to the end, I think if I could just go 10 feet farther." And finally, that's what he did. On the 7th night, just as the thread ran out, he and the other two reached a shaft that was wider than any they had found before, and it seemed, as they walked along it, to be slanting gently upward. But the spool was empty. Right? You'd have to go back. "You wait here," Justin said to the others. "I'm going just a little way further. Hang on to the spool, and if I call back," right? How smart. These rats are getting so smart, right? They're going to call, if you get lost, you call to someone so they can call for you and you can follow the sound of their voice and find your way back. They had tied the end of the thread around the spool so they would not lose it in the dark. Justin had a hunch, right? If you had a hunch, you have a guess. He's thinking, the air coming through the shaft had a fresher smell where they were, and seemed to be blowing harder than in the other shafts. Up ahead, he thought he could hear the whir of a machine running quietly, and there was a faint vibration in the metal under his feet. He went on. The shaft turned upward at a sharp angle, and then, straight ahead, he saw it, a patch of lighter colored darkness than the pitch black around him, and in the middle of it, 3 stars twinkling. It was the open sky. Across the opening there was, as Jenner had predicted, a coarse screen of heavy wire. Right? Jenner had already warned him this could be happening. He's going to see a big screen with heavy wire. Right? It's to keep the rats out of coming in the building, probably. These rats weren't or they're probably to keep rats from coming into the building. These rats want to get out of the building. He ran toward it for a few seconds longer and then stopped. The sound of the machine had grown suddenly louder, changing from a whir to a roar. It had obviously shifted speed. An automatic switch somewhere in the building had turned it from low to high, and the air blowing past Justin came on so hard it made him gasp. Right? Have you ever been somewhere and all of a sudden the air conditioner turns on an automatic switch? He braced his feet against the metal and held on. In a minute, as suddenly as it had roared, the machine returned to a whisper. He looked around and realized he was lucky to have stopped. He was lucky to have stopped. By the dim light from the sky, he could see that he had reached a point where perhaps 24 air shafts came together, like branches into the trunk of a tree. If he had gone a few steps farther, he would never have been able to distinguish which shaft was his. Oh, if he would have kept walking, he wouldn't have been able to turn around and go back to the shaft he was in. He might have gone down the wrong shaft, right? His friends are behind him. You'd have to really call out to see which shaft they were down. He turned in his tracks, and in a few minutes he rejoined his friends. He went back from the way he came, right? He turned in his tracks. Your tracks are where you're walking. He had a meeting that night, and Justin told all of us what he had found. We had a meeting that night. He had left the thread anchored by the screwdriver to guide us out. Some were for leaving immediately, but it was late, and Jenner and I argued against it. We did not know how long it would take us to break through the screen at the end. If it should take more than an hour or two, daylight would be upon us. We would then be unable to risk returning to the laboratory and would have to spend the day in the shaft. Sorry, I hope you guys could see all that. I try to look at the screen and my book at the same time, but it's hard to read when I look at the screen, so I try and look at the book. It seems like I'm a better reader when I look at the book. The shaft, or try to get away, the trap, I'm going to go back there. We would then be able to risk returning to the laboratory and would have to spend, we would then be unable to risk returning to the laboratory and would have to spend the day in the shaft or try to get away by broad daylight, right? It's hard because then they can see them. They want to go at night when everyone else is sleeping and no one's there and it's dark. Dr. Schultz might even figure out how we had gone and trap us up in the air shaft. Finally, reluctantly, everyone agreed to spend one more day in the laboratory and leave early the next night. But it was a hard decision, with freedom so near and everyone thinking as I did. Suppose Dr. Schultz grew suspicious and put locks on our cages. Suppose someone found our thread and pulled it out. That was unlikely. The near end, tied to the spool, was 6 feet up the shaft, well hidden. Just the same, we were uneasy, right? If they're found out now, they might get locked in their cages and they won't have another chance to get away. But they've decided to go back to their cages. Then, just as we were ending our meeting, a new complication arose. We had been standing in a rough circle on the floor of the laboratory, just outside the 2 screen doors that enclosed the mice cages. Now, from inside the cabinet came a voice. Nicodemus. It was a clear but plaintive call, the voice of a mouse. We had almost forgotten the mice were there, and I was startled to hear that one of them knew my name. We all grew quiet. Who's calling me? I asked. My name is Jonathan. Oh, said the voice. Jonathan Frisby. We have 2 Jonathans in our class, huh? But he spells his name like Jonathan Lopez. We have been listening to your talk about going out. We would like to go too, but we cannot open our cages. As you can imagine, this caused a certain consternation, right? They're worried. Consternation, great word, coming at the last minute. None of us knew much about the mice, except what we had heard Dr. Schultz dictate into his tape recorder. I don't even know if you guys know what a tape recorder is, but I can record my voice on things. I used to do it on a tape recorder. When I dictate, I talk and I record my voice. That's the dictating part. So you guys have dictated stuff onto your iPads. From that, we have learned only that they had been getting the same injections we were getting, and that the treatment had worked about as well on them as on us. They were a sort of side experiment without a control group. Right? There's no mice that didn't get shots. All of them got the shot. Justin was studying the cabinet. "Why not?" he said. "If we can get the doors open." Someone muttered, "They'll slow us down." "No," said the mouse Jonathan, "we will not. Only open our cages when you go, and we will make our own way. We won't even stay with you, if you prefer." "How many are you?" I asked. "Only 8. And the cabinet doors are easy to open. There's just a simple hook halfway up." But Justin and Arthur had already figured that out. They climbed up the screen, unhooked the hook, and the doors swung open. "The cages open the same way as yours," said another mouse, "but we can't reach far enough to unlatch them." "All right," I said. "Tomorrow night, as soon as Dr. Schultz and the others leave, we'll open your cages, and you can follow the thread with us to get out. After that, you're on your own." "Agreed," said Jonathan, "and thank you." "And now," I said, "we should all get back to the cages. Justin, please hook the doors again." I had latched myself into my cage and was getting ready for sleep when I heard a scratching noise on the door, and there was Jenner climbing down from above. "Nicodemus," he said, "can I come in?" "Of course, but it's getting on toward morning." "I won't stay long." He unlatched the door and entered. "There's something we've got to decide." "I know," I said. "I've been thinking about it too. When we get out, where are we going to go?" Right? These rats are so smart. They're planning ahead. So smart. I could not see Jenner's face in the dark of the cage, but I knew from his voice that he was worrying. Right? You can hear worry in someone's voice when they're worried. I said, "At first I thought, home, of course. But then, when I began remembering, I realized that won't work. We could find the way, I suppose, now that we can read. But if we did, what then? We wouldn't find anyone we know." "And yet," Jenner said, "you know, that's not the real point." "No. The real point is this. We don't know where to go because we don't know what we are. Do you want to go back to living in a sewer pipe and eating other people's garbage? Because that's what rats do. But the fact is, we aren't rats anymore. We're something Dr. Schultz has made, something new. Dr. Schultz says our intelligence has increased more than 1,000%. I suspect he's underestimated. I think we're probably as intelligent as he is, maybe more. We can read, and with a little practice, we'll be able to write, too. I mean, to do both. I think we can learn to do anything we want. But where do we do it? But where do we do it? Where are they moving to, right? But where do they do it? Where do we do it? Where does a group of civilized rats fit in? If you're civilized, you wear clothes and you eat with a fork, right? If you're not civilized, you're not used to living in a house, or I don't know. "I don't know," I said. "We're going to have to find out." That's funny, I said. I don't know, I said. "We're going to have to find out. It won't be easy, but even so, the first step must be to get out of here. We're lucky to have a chance, but it won't last. We're a jump ahead of Dr. Schultz. If he knew what we know, he wouldn't leave us alone in here another night, and he's sure to find out soon." Right? He's already saying they're 1,000 times smarter. He's going to figure out they are going to be able to get out of their cages. "Another thing to worry about," Jenner said. "If we do get away, when he finds we're gone, won't he figure out how we did it, and won't he realize that we must have learned to read?" "Probably. And then what? What will happen when he announces that there's a group of civilized rats roaming loose, rats that can read and think and figure things out?" I said, "Let's wait until we're free before we worry about that." good plan, right? Let's not worry in advance about things that maybe might happen, right? I love this book. Anyway, let's keep going. But Jenner was right. It was a thing to worry about, and maybe it still is, right? He's talking now. He's telling Miss Frisby this story. So, the next day was terrible. I kept expecting to hear Dr. Schultz say, "Who took my screwdriver?" And then to hear Julie add, "My thread is missing too." That could have happened and set them to thinking, but it didn't. And that night, an hour after Julie, George, and Dr. Schultz left the laboratory, we were out of our cages and gathered, the whole group of us, before the mouse cabinet. Justin opens its doors, unlatched their cages, and the mice came out. They looked very small and frightened, but one strode bravely forward, right? He strode, this is the past tense of stride. If you stride, you walk with your arms proud, you walk tall. So this is the past tense, right? He strode out. "You are Nicodemus," he said to me. Oh, sorry, it was a question. "You are Nicodemus?" He said to me, right? Maybe he should have asked him. "I'm Jonathan," but he's not really asking him. He's saying it and just assuming. "I'm Jonathan. Thank you for taking us out with you." "We're not out yet," I said, "but you're welcome." We had no time for chatting. The light coming in the windows was turning gray. In less than an hour, it would be dark, right? They're going at dusk time, right? When it starts getting dark outside, it's still a little lighter than when it's really nighttime. And we would need light to figure out how to open the screen at the end of the shaft. We went to the opening in the baseboard. "Justin," I said, "take the lead. Roll up the thread as you go. I'll bring up the rear. No noise. There's sure to be somebody awake somewhere in the building. We don't want them to hear us." I did not want to leave the thread where it might be found. The more I thought about it, the more I felt sure Dr. Schultz would try to track us down for quite a few reasons. Justin lifted the grid, pushed open the sliding panel, and one by one we went through. Right? A grid is like a thing that looks like an array. As I watched the others go ahead of me, I noticed for the first time that one of the mice was white. Then I went in myself, closing the grid behind me and pushing the panel half shut again. Its normal position. I wonder if that's Mr. Aged. With Justin leading the way, we moved through the dark passage quickly and easily. In only 15 or 20 minutes, we had reached the end of the thread. Then, as Justin had told us it would, the shaft widened. We could hear the whir of the machine ahead, and almost immediately we saw a square of gray daylight. We had reached the end of the shaft, and there a terrible thing happened. Justin, you will recall, had told us that the machine, the pump that pulled the air toward the shaft, had switched from low speed to high when he had first explored through there. So we were forewarned, right? If you're forewarned, you're warned about something before it happens. They were forewarned. The trouble was, the forewarning was no use at all. Not so far as the mice were concerned. We were approaching the lighted square of the opening when the roar began. The blast of air came like a sudden whistling gale. Do you guys know what a gale is? It's another word for wind, a very, very, very strong wind. It took my breath. I think it has to be a strong wind. I don't think you can have a soft gale. I think it's the big winds or the gales. It took my breath and flattened my ears against my head, and I closed my eyes instinctively. If you instinctively do it, he didn't even think about it. He just did, his eyes closed, almost like he wasn't even planned it at all. It just happened instinctively. His body knew to close his eyes when he felt that big blast of air. I was still in the rear, right? He's in the back of the line of everybody. And when I opened my eyes again, I saw one of the mice sliding past me, clawing uselessly with his small nails on the smooth metal beneath him. Sorry, I think we have a sad mice story right here. Another followed him, and still another. As one by one, they were blown backward into the dark maze of tunnels we had just left. Oh, they were blown backwards. I braced myself. I thought they were going to get sucked into the air conditioning. I braced myself in the corner of the shaft and grabbed at one as he slid by. It was the white mouse. I caught him by one leg, pulled him around behind me, and held him. Another blew face on into the rat ahead of me and stopped there. It was Jonathan, who had been near the lead, but the rest were lost. 6 in all, right? There was 8 altogether, so there's 2 left. Mr. Ages and Jonathan. 6 are gone. They were simply too light. They blew away like dead leaves, and we never saw them again. In another minute, the roar stopped. The rush of air slowed from a gale to a breeze. Yeah, it is. A gale has to be a very strong wind. When it gets less, then I call it a breeze. It slowed from a gale to a breeze, and we were able to go forward again. I said to the white mouse, "You'd better hold on to me. That might happen again." He looked at me in dismay, right? If you're in dismay, you're just sad. It's like when you look at someone in dismay, it's like you just can't, you're not happy. But what about the others? 6 are lost. I've got to go back and look for them. Jonathan quickly joined him. "I'll go with you." "No," I said. "That would be useless and foolish. You have no idea which shaft they were blown into, nor even if they went all the same way. And if you should find them, how would you find your way out again? And suppose the wind comes again, then there would be 8 lost instead of 6. The wind did come again, half a dozen times more. Oh, man. What's a half a dozen? I'll give you a second to think about it. Half of 12, right? A dozen is 12. Half of 12, 6. So 6 of them. 6 more times the wind came, while we worked with the screwdriver to pry open the screen. Each time we had to stop working and hang on. The 2 mice clung to the screen itself. Some of us braced ourselves behind them, in case they should slip. And Justin, taking the thread with him as a guideline, went back to search for the other 6. Justin, the rat, right? He went back to look for the other 6 mice while they're working at getting the cage off. How nice. He explored shaft after shaft to the end of the spool, calling softly as he went. But it was futile. If you do something and it's futile, it's of no, it didn't work, it didn't help, it didn't do any good. He did not find the other mice. To this day, we don't know what became of those 6 mice. They may have found their way out eventually, or they may have died in there. We left an opening in the screen for them, just in case, when they got the screen off. The screen, it was heavy wire with the screen, right? Just one sentence, the screen. It's not really a sentence. I need a predicate for my sentence. But they put a period there. And right when I write stuff, I have a choice of how to do stuff. And he is an author, so he can do that. But normally I'd have to say the screen was, right? I'd say the screen was heavy wire. But they don't. They put the screen, period. It was heavy wire with holes around the size of an acorn. And it was set in a steel frame. We pried and hammered at it with the screwdriver, but we could not move it. It was fastened on the outside. We couldn't see how. Finally, the white mouse had an idea. "Push the screwdriver through the wire near the bottom," he said, "and pry up." Right? If I pry up, he's pushing up. We did, and the wire bent a fraction of an inch, just a little piece of an inch. We did it again, prying down, then left, then right. The hole in the wire grew slowly bigger until the white mouse said, "I think that's enough." He climbed to the small opening, and by squirming and twisting, he got through. Jonathan followed him. They both fell out of sight, but in a minute Jonathan's head came back in view on the outside. "It's a sliding bolt," he said. "We're working on it." Inside, we could hear the faint rasping as the 2 mice tugged on the bolt handle, working it back. Then the crack in the base of the screen widened. We pushed it open, and we were standing on the roof of NIMH. Free! Yay! They made it out. All right, our next chapter would be the Boniface estate. Hasta la vista.